They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that when millions of dollars are involved, family loyalty becomes surprisingly thin. I'm Sarah Matthews, and I'm about to tell you how my own relatives tried to steal my entire life's work right out from under me, and how one oversight on their part led to the most satisfying revenge in business history. 3 years ago, I was living the American dream. I'd built a digital marketing agency from scratch in my one-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, working 18-hour days and surviving on ramen noodles and determination. Matthews Digital Solutions started with just me, my laptop, and an unshakable belief that small businesses deserve the same quality marketing strategies that big corporations could afford. By year 2, we had 12 employees and were managing campaigns for over 50 clients. By year 3, we'd grown to 35 employees, opened a second office, and were generating over $15 million in annual revenue. And that's when my family decided they wanted in. It started innocently enough. My older brother Jake had been struggling in his corporate finance job, constantly complaining about his boss and dreaming of entrepreneurship. My sister Amy had just finished her MBA and was looking for opportunities in business development. And my parents, who'd spent their entire lives running a small hardware store, were finally ready to retire and wanted to be part of their daughter's success story. "Sarah," Dad said over Sunday dinner, "we're so proud of what you've built, but running a business this size alone, it's too much for one person. You need family you can trust. We could help you take this to the next level," Jake added. "I understand corporate finance, Amy knows business development, and Mom and Dad have decades of small business experience." At the time, it seemed like perfect timing. I was exhausted from managing every aspect of the business myself, and the idea of bringing in people I trusted completely was incredibly appealing. So I did what I thought was the right thing. I brought my family into the business. Jake became our chief financial officer, handling all financial operations and client billing. Amy took over business development and new client acquisition. Mom became our office manager, handling HR and day-to-day operations. Dad became our client relations consultant, which basically meant he charmed potential clients and helped close deals. For about 6 months, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. Jake streamlined our financial processes and improved our profit margins. Amy landed several major new clients. Mom created systems that made our office run more efficiently. Dad's natural charisma helped us win contracts we might not have gotten otherwise. I finally felt like I could breathe. The business was growing faster than ever, and I had people I trusted completely handling the areas where I was weakest. But then things started to feel off. It began with small things. Jake would have financial meetings that I wasn't invited to. Amy would mention client conversations that I hadn't been part of. Mom would handle employee issues without consulting me. Dad would promise clients things without checking with me first. When I brought this up, they assured me it was just growing pains. "Sarah, you hired us to handle these areas so you could focus on the big picture," Jake said. "We can't check with you about every little decision. You need to learn to delegate," Amy added. "You can't micromanage everything if you want the business to scale." They were right, of course. Delegation was necessary for growth, but something in my gut kept telling me that this felt different from normal delegation. Then, last month, I noticed something strange in our client retention numbers. We were losing accounts at a higher rate than usual, but when I asked Jake about it, he brushed it off. "Just market fluctuation, Sarah. Some clients always drop off as they grow and need different services." But when I tried to look at the detailed financial reports myself, Jake told me he was reorganizing the books and would have everything ready for me to review soon. 2 weeks went by. Still no financial reports. That's when I decided to do some investigating on my own. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 3 months, Jake had been systematically transferring money from our client accounts into new accounts that I didn't recognize. Amy had been negotiating contracts that diverted significant portions of our revenue to consulting fees paid to companies I'd never heard of. Mom had been handling payroll in ways that seemed to inflate certain salaries dramatically, and Dad had been promising client services that would be handled by subsidiary companies that would bill separately. They weren't just mismanaging the business, they were stealing from it. But the worst part? When I confronted them about what I'd found, they didn't even try to deny it. "Sarah," Jake said calmly, "we've been meaning to talk to you about this, about stealing from our company, about restructuring the business in a way that makes more sense for everyone involved," Amy corrected. "You see, honey," Dad said gently, "you built something beautiful, but you're not equipped to handle a business this size. We're trying to help you before you make mistakes that could destroy everything." They spent 2 hours explaining their plan to me. In their version of events, I was a talented but naive entrepreneur who needed experienced family members to manage the complex financial and operational aspects of a growing business. They'd been protecting the company's assets by moving them into separate accounts and structures that would be more tax efficient and better protected from liability. The consulting fees Amy had been arranging, those were going to companies that Jake and Dad had set up to provide specialized services that our main company couldn't offer directly. The inflated payroll Mom had been managing, that was market rate compensation for executive-level family members who were contributing significantly more value than regular employees. It was all very reasonable, very well planned, and completely designed to steal my company from me while making it look like they were helping me manage it better. "Sarah," Mom said finally, "we love you, but you're not ready to run a business this size. We're trying to save you from yourself." That's when I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about my family fundamentally believing that I wasn't capable of managing what I'd built. They saw me as a lucky amateur who'd stumbled into success and needed experienced adults to take over before I ruined everything. "What if I don't agree to this restructuring?" I asked. Jake and Amy exchanged glances. "Sarah," Jake said slowly, "we've already moved most of the operational assets into the new structure. If you don't cooperate with the transition, you could lose everything." They'd backed me into a corner. Agree to their plan and lose control of my company, or fight them and risk losing the company entirely. But what they didn't know was that I still had one advantage they'd overlooked, and tomorrow I was going to use it to teach them exactly what happens when you try to steal from someone who built the thing you're trying to take. Before I tell you about the mistake my family made that led to their complete downfall, I need you guys to hit that like button if you're already hooked on this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever had family members try to take advantage of your success? Do you think Sarah should fight back? Or try to work things out? And make sure you're subscribed, because this story of family betrayal and business revenge is about to take a turn that will blow your mind. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are about to learn why that was the biggest mistake of their lives. Trust me, what happens next will change how you think about family, business, and the importance of always keeping some cards close to your chest. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I sat in my car outside our office building, trying to process what had just happened. My own family had spent months systematically stealing from the company I'd built, and they'd presented it to me like they were doing me a favor. But the more I thought about their explanation, the angrier I got. Not just because of the theft, but because of the underlying assumption that I was too incompetent to run my own business. I'd built Matthew's digital solutions from nothing. I'd identified market opportunities, developed innovative service offerings, recruited talented employees, and grown the company to over $15 million in annual revenue. But according to my family, I was just a naive amateur who'd gotten lucky. That's when I decided to do something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I logged into all of our company systems to see exactly what had been happening while I'd been delegating financial oversight to Jake. What I found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Over the past 4 months, Jake had transferred $3.2 million from our main operating accounts into accounts belonging to Matthews Holdings LLC, a company he'd apparently created without telling me. Amy had signed contracts worth $2.8 million that diverted our consulting fees to Matthews Business Development Partners, another company I'd never heard of. Mom had been running payroll that paid executive salaries, totaling $9 million to family members for positions that shouldn't have existed. And Dad had negotiated deals that transferred another $1.3 million to Matthew's Client Relations Services for work that our regular employees were actually doing. In total, my family had stolen $8.2 million from our company over 4 months. But here's the thing that really got to me. They'd been incredibly sophisticated about it. These weren't sloppy cash grabs or obvious embezzlement schemes. They'd created legitimate-looking business structures, filed proper paperwork, and documented everything in ways that would probably hold up in court. They'd planned this for months, maybe longer. While I'd been trusting them to help me grow the business, they'd been planning to steal it from me. I spent the rest of the night going through every transaction, every contract, every financial document I could access. And that's when I discovered something that made me smile for the first time in hours. Jake had been very careful to move money out of our operating accounts and client billing systems. Amy had been very careful to redirect contract payments to their shell companies. Mom had been very careful to inflate payroll for their fake executive positions, but they'd all made one crucial mistake. None of them had thought to change the administrative access controls on our primary business management software. I was still the system administrator for our CRM, our project management platform, our client communication systems, and most importantly, our digital payment processing accounts. Jake could move money that was already in our bank accounts, but I still controlled all the systems that generated new revenue. Amy could redirect future contracts, but I still controlled all the client relationships and communication platforms. Mom could manipulate current payroll, but I still controlled the systems that managed our entire operational infrastructure. They'd stolen $8.2 million, but they'd forgotten that I still controlled the pipeline that generated all future revenue. The more I dug into our systems, the more I realized that my family had made their theft incredibly vulnerable to exactly the kind of disruption I was in a position to cause. Their shell companies were entirely dependent on continued revenue flow from Matthews Digital Solutions. They'd set up elaborate structures to siphon off our money, but they hadn't actually built any independent revenue streams. Jake's Matthews Holdings LLC was just a bank account that collected money from our main company. Amy's Matthews Business Development Partners was just a pass-through entity that took commissions on deals our real employees had actually closed. Dad's Matthews Client Relations Services was just a way to charge our clients extra for services we were already providing. None of their companies could generate a single dollar without continued access to our client relationships, our operational systems, and our established business processes. And I controlled all of that. I spent the rest of the night developing a plan that would teach my family exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone who built the infrastructure you were trying to exploit. The next morning, I got to the office early and started making changes. First, I changed all the administrative passwords on our client management systems, project management platforms, and digital payment accounts. Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad would no longer be able to access any of the tools they needed to continue their theft. Second, I sent a carefully worded email to all of our major clients, explaining that Matthews Digital Solutions was undergoing internal restructuring and that all future payments should be made directly to our original company accounts, not to any subsidiary or affiliated companies they might have been told about. Third, I contacted our bank and put holds on all transfers to the shell companies my family had created, pending internal financial auditing. Fourth, I sent termination notices to Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad, effective immediately, for financial misconduct and unauthorized use of company resources. And finally, I changed all the locks on our office building and revoked their access cards. By 9 a.m., my family had been completely cut off from the business they'd been stealing from. My phone started ringing at 9:15. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" Jake's voice was panicked. "I can't access any of our financial systems." "That's because you don't work here anymore, Jake." "What do you mean I don't work here anymore?" "I mean you were terminated this morning for embezzlement and fraud." "Sarah, you can't just fire us. We have contracts, we have equity agreements." "Actually, Jake, I can fire you. Because despite everything you've stolen, I still own this company. And the contracts you're referring to? They were never legally executed because they were based on fraudulent financial representations." Amy called 5 minutes later. "Sarah, you need to reverse whatever you just did. Our clients are calling asking about payment processing changes." "Good. I sent them clarification emails explaining that they should only make payments to Matthews Digital Solutions directly, not to your fake subsidiary companies." "Those aren't fake companies, Sarah. They're legitimate business structures that we set up to optimize our operations. Amy, they're shell companies designed to steal money from the business I built. And as of this morning, they're cut off from any revenue stream." Dad called 10 minutes after that. "Sarah, honey, I think there's been some kind of system error. None of us can get into the office." "That's not a system error, Dad. I had the locks changed. You're no longer employees of Matthews Digital Solutions. Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. You can't run this business without us. Watch me." By noon, I'd received increasingly frantic calls from all 4 family members. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. Without access to our client management systems, they couldn't maintain the relationships that fed revenue to their shell companies. Without access to our operational platforms, they couldn't fulfill any of the contracts they'd signed with clients. Without access to our office and infrastructure, they couldn't even pretend to be running legitimate businesses. They'd built their entire theft scheme on the assumption that they'd always have access to the company I'd created. Now that access was gone, and their sophisticated financial structures were revealed to be exactly what they were, empty shell companies with no independent value. But what really drove the point home was what happened to the money they'd already stolen. Because while Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad had been very clever about moving money out of our accounts, they'd been remarkably stupid about where they'd put it. The beautiful thing about sophisticated thieves is that they often outsmart themselves. My family had spent so much energy creating elaborate business structures to make their theft look legitimate that they'd forgotten one crucial detail. All of their shell companies were entirely dependent on continued business relationships with Matthews Digital Solutions. When I cut off their access to our systems and clients, I didn't just stop them from stealing more money. I destroyed the foundation of the entire financial network they'd built. Jake's Matthews Holdings LLC had been positioned to clients as a parent company that provided financial oversight for our digital marketing services. But without access to our client relationships, Jake couldn't maintain the illusion that Matthews Holdings was a real business. Clients started asking questions about why they were being billed by a company they'd never heard of for services they thought they were getting from Matthews Digital. Amy's Matthews Business Development Partners had been selling itself as a specialized consulting firm that helped clients optimize their digital marketing strategies. But without access to our proprietary client data and campaign analytics, Amy had nothing to consult about. She was just someone with an MBA and no actual business to run. Dad's Matthews Client Relations Services had been charging clients premium fees for enhanced customer support and relationship management. But without access to our CRM systems or our existing client communication channels, Dad was just a guy with a phone trying to convince people to pay extra for services they were already receiving. And Mom's inflated payroll scheme fell apart the moment I revoked her access to our HR systems and employee management platforms. Within 48 hours of my lockout, all 4 shell companies were facing serious problems. Clients were refusing to pay invoices from companies they didn't recognize. Vendors were demanding payment for services that the shell companies couldn't actually provide. And my family was discovering that stealing $8, $2 million is only profitable if you can keep the theft operation running. But here's where it gets really interesting. I hadn't actually tried to recover the money they'd already stolen. Not yet. Instead, I'd done something much more strategic. I'd made their theft unprofitable going forward, while making it impossible for them to clean up the mess they'd already created. Jake called me on Thursday, 3 days after the lockout. "Sarah, we need to talk. This scorched earth approach isn't helping anyone." "I disagree, Jake. It's helping me quite a bit. Look, I know you're upset about the financial restructuring, but cutting us off from the business is going to hurt everyone, including you." Financial restructuring. He was still calling it financial restructuring. "Jake, how much money do you think your shell companies have made since Tuesday?" Silence. "I'll tell you how much. $0. Because without access to our client relationships and operational systems, your legitimate business structures can't actually do business. Sarah, you're destroying value for everyone involved." "No, Jake. I'm protecting value that you were destroying through theft." "We weren't stealing, Sarah. We were repositioning assets to create more sustainable corporate structures." "Okay, let's test that theory. If your companies are so legitimate and sustainable, they should be able to operate independently of Matthews Digital Solutions, right?" Another silence. "Here's what's going to happen, Jake. You've got $3.2 million sitting in accounts belonging to Matthews Holdings LLC. You've got Amy holding $2.8 million in Matthews Business Development Partners. You've got Dad sitting on $1.3 million in Matthews Client Relations Services. And Mom took $1.9 million through fraudulent payroll. Those amounts represent legitimate business. Those amounts represent money you stole from me. But here's the beautiful part. You can't keep that money unless you can prove that your companies provide legitimate value independent of the infrastructure I built." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your clients are starting to figure out that they've been paying for services from companies that don't actually exist. I mean that vendors are demanding payment for work your shell companies can't actually do. I mean that you've created financial obligations that you can't meet without continued access to my business." I could hear Jake breathing heavily on the other end of the phone. "Jake, how much do you think it's going to cost to unwind all the contracts Amy signed that promise services your fake companies can't deliver? How much are you going to owe in penalties when clients realize they've been overcharged for consulting services that were never actually provided?" "Sarah, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be." "No, Jake. You made this complicated when you decided to steal from me instead of just asking for help when you were struggling financially. We weren't stealing. Jake, stop. Just stop lying. Even now, when your entire scheme is falling apart, you're still trying to convince me that theft is restructuring. Amy called me Friday afternoon. Sarah, our clients are threatening to sue Matthew's business development partners for breach of contract. That's interesting, Amy. What contracts did you breach? The contracts I signed promising specialized consulting services that we can't deliver without access to your client data and campaign analytics. So you're admitting that your company can't actually provide the services you've been charging clients for? I'm admitting that there are operational dependencies that make the current situation untenable. Operational dependencies. That's what Amy was calling theft now. Amy, let me ask you something. How much money do you think Matthew's business development partners is going to lose if clients sue for breach of contract? I don't know. Potentially, a lot. More than the $2.8 million you've stolen? Sarah, that money represents legitimate consulting fees for work I actually did. Work you did using my company's resources, my client relationships, my proprietary data, and my operational infrastructure. Work that you can't continue doing now that you don't have access to any of those things. So what are you saying? I'm saying that your consulting company is about to lose more money in lawsuits and penalties than you stole from me, which means your theft wasn't just morally wrong, it was also financially stupid. Dad called Saturday morning. Sarah, honey, this has gone too far. Your mother is having anxiety attacks about the legal issues we're facing. What legal issues, Dad? Clients are threatening to sue Matthew's client relations services for fraudulent billing. They're saying we charge them for premium services that we can't actually provide. And can you provide those services, Dad? Not without access to your CRM systems and client communication platforms. So you charged clients money for services you can't actually deliver. Sarah, you know it's more complicated than that. Actually, Dad, it's not complicated at all. You created a fake company, charged clients for services that company couldn't provide, and now you're facing fraud allegations. That's not complicated. That's just the natural consequences of theft. We weren't trying to steal from you, Sarah. We were trying to help you manage a business that was getting too big for you to handle alone. By creating fake companies and transferring millions of dollars to accounts I didn't know about. By creating professional structures that would protect everyone's interests. Dad, whose interests were protected when you charged clients extra money for services they were already receiving from my regular employees? Dad was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, what do you want from us? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You chose to steal from me instead of supporting me. Now you get to deal with what happens when your theft scheme collapses. And what happens next? Next, you figure out how to unwind all the financial obligations you've created with money you can't keep. Next, you explain to clients why they were overcharged by companies that never should have existed. Next, you deal with the fact that your sophisticated financial structures were just an elaborate way to steal from your own daughter. Sarah, Dad, you had a choice. You could have been proud of what I built and asked how you could genuinely help me grow it. Instead, you decided that I was too incompetent to run my own business, and that you were entitled to take it from me. That's not what we thought. That's exactly what you thought. And now you're learning what happens when you underestimate someone while simultaneously trying to steal from them. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking at the company I'd built and protected. Matthew's Digital Solutions was stronger than ever. Our clients were happy to be dealing directly with us again. Our employees were relieved that the weird family politics were over, and our revenue was flowing back into the accounts where it belonged. But more importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I was capable of fighting for what I'd built, even when the fight was against people I loved. My family had made the mistake of thinking that because they were family, I wouldn't defend myself against their theft. They were wrong, and they were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. By Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd locked my family out of the business, their situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. Jake's Matthews Holdings LLC was facing $7 million in pending lawsuits from clients who were demanding refunds for services they'd never actually received from a legitimate holding company. Amy's Matthews business development partners owed $1.8 million in penalties for consulting contracts she couldn't fulfill without access to proprietary data and client relationships. Dad's Matthews Client Relations Services was being investigated by 3 different clients for fraudulent billing practices, with potential damages exceeding $900,000. And Mom was facing personal liability for payroll fraud, that could result in both financial penalties and potential charges. In total, my family's sophisticated business structures were now facing financial obligations that exceeded the $8.2 million they'd stolen by more than $2 million. They'd managed to turn their theft into a net loss, but what really sealed their fate was something they hadn't anticipated. I'd been documenting everything, every email about their restructuring plans, every contract they'd signed without my authorization, every financial transfer they'd made to accounts I didn't control, every conversation where they'd explained that they were protecting me from my own incompetence. I'd been building a comprehensive record of their theft from the moment I'd discovered it. And on Monday morning, I did something that changed the entire dynamic of our situation. I sent that documentation to a business attorney who specialized in corporate fraud and family business disputes. "Ms. Matthews," the attorney said after reviewing my evidence, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of embezzlement and corporate theft I've seen in 20 years of practice. What are my options?" "Well, you have several paths forward. You could pursue charges, which would likely result in prosecutions for wire fraud and embezzlement. You could pursue civil litigation to recover the stolen funds plus damages, or you could use the threat of legal action to negotiate a settlement that gets your money back and ensures this never happens again. What would you recommend? That depends on what outcome you're looking for. Do you want your family members to face serious consequences? Do you want to recover your money? Do you want to make sure they can never do this again? Or do you want some combination of all three?" I thought about that question for several hours. Did I want my family to face serious consequences? Part of me did. They'd betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, stealing from the business I'd built while pretending to help me grow it. But another part of me just wanted my money back and assurance that they'd never be able to hurt me again. "I want to offer them a choice," I finally told the attorney. "Full restitution plus penalties, or prosecution. That's a reasonable approach. We can structure a settlement offer that gives them a clear incentive to return the money, while making it clear that failure to comply will result in serious legal consequences." The settlement offer I had my attorney draft was simple and devastating. My family had 30 days to return the full $8.2 million they'd stolen, plus an additional $2 million in damages and penalties. They had to dissolve all the shell companies they'd created and transfer any remaining assets to Matthews Digital Solutions. They had to sign agreements that they would never attempt to interfere with my business operations again, and would have no future claim to any ownership or involvement in Matthews Digital Solutions. And they had to publicly acknowledge that their restructuring had been unauthorized and harmful to the company. If they complied with these terms, I would agree not to pursue charges or additional civil litigation. If they failed to comply, I would immediately file complaints for embezzlement, wire fraud, and corporate theft, and pursue civil litigation for treble damages. Jake called me within hours of receiving the settlement offer. "Sarah, this is insane. You're demanding we pay back more money than we actually took. Jake, you took $8.2 million and created financial liabilities that could cost you more than $10 million. I'm offering you a way to resolve this for $10. $2 million instead of facing potentially unlimited liability plus prosecution. But we don't have $10.2 million. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me. Sarah, we're family. You can't seriously be considering having us arrested. Jake, you're right. We are family, which makes what you did even worse. You weren't just stealing from a business partner. You were stealing from your sister who trusted you completely. We weren't trying to hurt you. Jake, I don't care what you were trying to do. I care what you actually did. And what you actually did was steal over $8 million from me while telling me it was for my own good. So what happens now? Now you have 30 days to come up with $10.2 million, or you face federal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud. Amy called the next day. Sarah, you have to understand that we can't possibly come up with that much money. Amy, you should have thought about that before you created consulting contracts you couldn't fulfill. Those contracts were legitimate business arrangements. Amy, stop. Your consulting company never provided any services that weren't already being provided by my regular employees. You charged clients premium fees for work you didn't do, using data and relationships you didn't own. But the penalties and lawsuits are separate from what we took from the original company. No, Amy, they're not separate. They're the natural consequences of your theft. You can't steal a business infrastructure and then act surprised when your theft creates financial obligations you can't meet. So you're saying we owe money we don't have for consequences we didn't anticipate? I'm saying you owe money for theft you committed and lies you told. The fact that you didn't anticipate the consequences just proves that you're not as smart as you thought you were. Mom called on Thursday crying. Sarah, honey, please. We never meant for this to get so complicated. Mom, it was always this complicated. You just didn't think you'd get caught. We weren't trying to steal from you. We were trying to protect the business from growing too fast. Mom, you inflated your own salary by $300,000 over 4 months. How was that protecting the business? I was being paid market rate for executive-level responsibilities. Mom, you were our office manager. You weren't an executive. You created a fake position, paid yourself an executive salary, and called it market rate. But Sarah, we're your family. Surely we can work something out that doesn't involve lawyers and threats. Mom, we had a chance to work something out. It was called being honest with me about what you were doing instead of lying to my face for months while stealing my money. What if we can't come up with the settlement amount? Then you'll be arrested for embezzlement and face federal prosecution. Sarah, you wouldn't really have your own parents arrested, would you? Mom, you really stole $8 million from your own daughter, didn't you? She hung up without answering. Dad called Friday afternoon. Sarah, I need to know if you're serious about the prosecution. Completely serious, Dad. Because if you are, we need to start making arrangements to liquidate assets and try to raise the settlement money. That sounds like a smart plan, Dad. Sarah, I need you to understand something. If we liquidate everything we have, we'll be financially ruined. Your mother and I will lose our house, our retirement savings, everything. Dad, I need you to understand something. You stole $8 million from me. The fact that returning it will be financially difficult for you isn't my problem. It's the natural consequence of your choice to commit embezzlement. But we're family, Sarah. This will destroy our family. Dad, you destroyed our family when you decided to steal from me instead of supporting me. I'm just making sure you face the consequences of that choice. And if we somehow manage to come up with the settlement money, then you'll have learned an expensive lesson about what happens when you try to steal from someone who's smarter than you think they are. With 2 weeks left before the settlement deadline, my family was scrambling to liquidate assets and raise money. But they were about to discover that their problems were bigger than just coming up with $10.2 million. Because I had one more surprise waiting for them. With 10 days left before the settlement deadline, I got an unexpected call from my attorney. Sarah, we have a problem. Your family's attorney has been in touch, and they're claiming that some of the money they took was legitimately owed to them under verbal agreements you made when you brought them into the business. What kind of verbal agreements? They're claiming that you promised them equity stakes in the company in exchange for their work, and that the money they transferred to their shell companies represents partial payment against those promised ownership shares. I felt my blood pressure spike. Even facing prosecution, my family was still trying to lie their way out of the consequences of their theft. Did you make any such agreements? My attorney asked. Absolutely not. I hired them as employees, not as partners. I never promised anyone equity stakes. Well, their attorney is arguing that family business arrangements often involve informal agreements that aren't documented in writing, and that your family's actions were based on legitimate expectations of ownership. So they're trying to claim that theft is actually just a misunderstanding about ownership. Essentially, yes. It's a common defense strategy in family business disputes. Claim that what looks like embezzlement was actually based on good faith belief in verbal agreements. Can they make that stick? It's possible, especially if they can present any evidence that suggests you intended to give them ownership stakes. Email communications, witness testimony, anything that might support their version of events. That's when I realized I had a problem. When I'd first brought my family into the business, I had been informal about a lot of things. I'd talked about our company, and building something together, and family legacy. If taken out of context, some of those conversations could potentially be interpreted as promises of ownership. But then I remembered something that made me smile. Actually, I told my attorney, I think I have exactly what we need to destroy their ownership claims. What's that? Documentation that proves they never believed they had legitimate ownership rights. That evening, I went through every email, text message, and recorded conversation from the past 6 months, and what I found was a goldmine of evidence that completely contradicted my family's new story. In email after email, Jake had referred to himself as an employee of Matthews Digital Solutions and talked about his salary and job responsibilities. In text messages, Amy had complained about working for me and mentioned how she hoped to eventually start her own business instead of working for Sarah forever. Mom had submitted timesheets and expense reports as an employee, not as an owner, And most damning of all, Dad had sent several emails where he explicitly talked about helping me grow my business and ensuring that Sarah's company remained successful. None of them had ever, in writing, claimed or expected ownership rights. Every piece of written communication treated me as the sole owner and them as employees. More importantly, I'd found something even better. Recorded conversations from our family meetings where they'd explicitly acknowledged that they were stealing from me. During one of the calls where Jake was trying to justify the restructuring, he'd said, "Sarah, I know this looks bad, but we're trying to protect your business from your inexperience." Amy had said, "We've been moving money around to create better financial structures, but we probably should have asked your permission first." Dad had said, "We know you built this company, sweetheart, but you need experienced people to help you manage it properly." In every recorded conversation, they'd acknowledged that it was my company, that they should have asked permission, and that their actions were unauthorized. Their own words completely destroyed any claim that they'd believed they had ownership rights. I sent this documentation to my attorney, who immediately contacted their attorney with a simple message. "If your clients proceed with fraudulent ownership claims in addition to their embezzlement, we'll be adding perjury and fraud charges to our complaint." Jake called me that evening. "Sarah, our attorney says you have recordings of our conversations." "I do. And that in those recordings, we acknowledge that the business belongs to you." "You did. So we can't claim that we thought we had ownership rights." "No, Jake, you can't, because you never thought you had ownership rights. You knew you were stealing from me. You just thought you could get away with it." "Sarah, what do you want from us?" "I want exactly what I said in the settlement offer. Full restitution plus damages or prosecution. And if we can't raise the money, then you'll be arrested for federal embezzlement and face 5 to 10 years in prison." "Sarah, please. We're family." "Jake, you keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel guilty for holding you accountable. But the fact that we're family makes what you did worse, not better. What if we can raise most of the money but not all of it? Then you'll be arrested for federal embezzlement and face 5 to 10 years in prison. There's no room for negotiation." "Jake, you stole over $8 million from me while lying to my face for months. The settlement offer is your negotiation. Take it or face prosecution." Amy called the next day. "Sarah, we've liquidated everything we can liquidate, and we're still $2.4 million short of the settlement amount. That sounds like a problem for you to solve, Amy. We don't have any more assets to sell. We've mortgaged our houses, liquidated our retirement accounts, borrowed against everything we own. And we still can't come up with the full amount. Amy, let me ask you something. Do you think the prosecutors will care that you can't afford to pay back the money you stole?" "Sarah, you have to be reasonable here." "I am being reasonable. I'm giving you the opportunity to resolve this without going to prison. If you can't take advantage of that opportunity, that's not my problem. But we've already lost everything trying to raise this money. Our homes, our savings, our credit. We've destroyed our financial lives trying to meet your settlement demands. Amy, you destroyed your financial lives when you decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure you face the full consequences of that decision. So there's really no way to work out a partial settlement? Amy, would you accept partial payment if someone stole $8 million from you?" She hung up without answering. With 3 days left before the deadline, Dad called with a different approach. "Sarah, what if we sign over everything we own to you? Our houses, our cars, our remaining assets, everything. It's not worth $10.2 million, but it's everything we have. Dad, the settlement offer was for money, not assets." "But Sarah, we're trying to show good faith here. We're willing to give you everything we own to try to make this right." "Dad, good faith would have been not stealing from me in the first place. Good faith would have been being honest with me about what you were doing instead of lying for months. So you won't accept a transfer of assets instead of cash? Dad, I don't want your house. I want my money back. But we can't get your money back. We've spent it, invested it, used it to pay for things. The actual cash is gone. Then you should have thought about that before you spent $8 million that didn't belong to you. Sarah, please, we're begging you. Don't send your own family to prison. Dad, don't steal from your own daughter. We can't undo what we did. No, Dad, you can't. But you can face the consequences of what you did." 2 days before the deadline, my family's attorney called my attorney with a final offer. They could raise $7.8 million in cash, transfer assets worth approximately $1.5 million, and sign agreements that would give me complete control over liquidating those assets to recover the remaining balance. It wasn't the full $10.2 million, but It was close enough that my attorney recommended I consider it. Sarah, they're essentially giving you everything they own, and most of the cash you demanded. If you reject this offer and pursue prosecution, you'll probably never recover more money than this. But they'd still be getting away with stealing from me. No, they wouldn't. They'd be losing their homes, their savings, their businesses, and their financial futures. That's not getting away with anything. That's facing severe consequences for their actions. I thought about it for 24 hours. My family had betrayed me in the worst way possible. They'd stolen millions of dollars from me while pretending to help me. They'd treated me like an incompetent child who needed their management. But they were also facing financial ruin. They'd lost their homes, their retirement savings, their credit, and their future financial security. Was sending them to prison really going to make me feel better? Or was watching them lose everything they'd worked for their entire lives sufficient justice? I made my decision. I accepted their final offer, but with additional conditions that my attorney added to ensure this could never happen again. In addition to the $7.8 million in cash and $5 million in transferred assets, my family had to sign agreements that included permanent restraining orders that prohibited them from having any involvement in Matthew's digital solutions or any future businesses I might create, acknowledgement that they had committed embezzlement and financial fraud against me, agreements that they would never publicly claim any ownership rights or involvement in my business success, personal guarantees that if any additional hidden assets or income streams were discovered, they would be immediately forfeited to me, monitoring agreements that required them to disclose all financial activities for the next 5 years. The settlement was structured so that I would recover about 90% of what they'd stolen, plus enough additional assets to cover most of the damages their theft had caused. But more importantly, the settlement completely destroyed their ability to ever claim that their theft had been justified or that they'd had legitimate business reasons for their actions. In signed, notarized documents, Jake acknowledged that he had unlawfully transferred corporate funds to unauthorized accounts without the knowledge or consent of the company owner. Amy acknowledged that she had created fraudulent business entities and diverted company revenue through deceptive contract negotiations. Mom acknowledged that she had manipulated payroll systems to pay unauthorized compensation to family members. And Dad acknowledged that he had charged clients for services that were not provided by legitimate business entities. They all signed statements acknowledging that Matthew's digital solutions belonged entirely to me, that they had never had ownership rights or legitimate claims to company assets, and that their actions had constituted embezzlement and fraud. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday morning in my attorney's office. My family showed up looking defeated and exhausted. They'd spent 2 months liquidating everything they owned to raise the settlement money, and it showed. "Sarah," Dad said as we were signing the final documents, "I need you to know that we never meant to hurt you. Dad, it doesn't matter what you meant to do. It matters what you actually did. But we genuinely thought we were helping you manage a business that was growing too fast. Dad, you thought you were helping me by stealing $8 million and hiding it in secret accounts? We thought we were protecting company assets and creating better financial structures. By lying to me about what you were doing?" Dad was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, will you ever be able to forgive us?" "Dad, I don't know. Right now, I'm just focused on making sure this never happens again. And our relationship as a family? Dad, you destroyed our relationship as a family when you decided to treat me like an incompetent child who needed you to steal her money for her own good." Mom was crying quietly as she signed her acknowledgement documents. "Sarah, we've lost everything. Our house, our savings, our retirement. We're going to be starting over with nothing at our age. Mom, you lost everything when you decided to steal from me. This settlement isn't punishment. It's just the natural consequence of your choices. But we're family. Mom, family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't lie to family for months while systematically transferring their money to secret accounts." Jake signed his documents without saying anything, but as we were leaving, he pulled me aside. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't over." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've lost everything because of your vindictive response to a family business disagreement. You've destroyed our lives over money. Jake, I've held you accountable for stealing from me. If that destroyed your lives, it's because stealing was a life-destroying choice. We weren't stealing, Sarah. We were trying to save you from making mistakes that would have bankrupted the company. Jake, even now, after losing everything, you're still lying about what you did." "I'm not lying. I genuinely believed that your inexperience was going to destroy what you'd built, so you decided to take it away from me without telling me? We decided to protect it until you were ready to handle it properly. I stared at my brother, realizing that he still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Jake, do you hear yourself? You're saying that you stole my company because you thought I was too stupid to run it. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. And the fact that you still think that way, even after everything that's happened, tells me that accepting this settlement instead of sending you to prison was probably too generous. Jake's face hardened. Sarah, you may have won this round, but don't think this makes you some kind of business genius. You got lucky with one company. Let's see how you do without family support. Jake, I built this company before you were involved, and I'll continue growing it after you're gone. The only thing you and Amy and Mom and Dad ever contributed was theft and lies. We'll see about that. As my family left the attorney's office, I realized that they hadn't learned anything from this experience. They still believed that their theft had been justified, that I was an incompetent business owner who'd gotten lucky, and that they were the victims of my vindictive response to their help. But that was okay, because while they were spending the next 5 years rebuilding their financial lives from nothing, I was going to be building Matthew's Digital Solutions into something even bigger than they'd tried to steal. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office looking at our quarterly revenue reports. Without the financial drain of my family's theft and the operational confusion of their restructuring, Matthew's Digital Solutions had grown faster than ever. We'd landed 3 major new clients who'd been impressed by our streamlined operations and transparent billing practices. We'd hired 5 new employees who actually contributed value instead of stealing it. And our profit margins had improved dramatically now that we weren't supporting fake executive salaries and fraudulent consulting fees. But the best part? I'd learned something valuable about myself and my business. I didn't need family to be successful. I didn't need people who shared my DNA to build something meaningful. What I needed was people who shared my values, my work ethic, and my commitment to honest business practices. My family had thought they were protecting me from my own inexperience. Instead, they'd been protecting me from discovering just how capable I was of handling challenges on my own. The $8.2 million they'd stolen had been recovered. The damage they'd caused had been repaired, and the business they'd tried to take from me was stronger than ever. But more importantly, I'd learned that I could defend what I'd built, even against people I loved. I could hold people accountable for their actions, even when those people were family, and I could build success based on merit and hard work, not on family loyalty or shared genetics. My family had tried to steal my company because they thought I wasn't capable of running it alone. They'd been wrong about my capabilities, and now they were dealing with the consequences of that miscalculation. 1 year after the settlement, Matthew's Digital Solutions had become everything I'd dreamed it could be. Without the constant drain of my family's theft and manipulation, we'd grown to 60 employees, opened offices in 3 cities, and were generating over $25 million in annual revenue. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial success. It was the culture we'd built. When my family had been involved in the business, there'd always been an undercurrent of politics and favoritism. Employees had noticed that my relatives got preferential treatment, made decisions without accountability, and seemed to operate by different rules than everyone else. Now, with a leadership team based on merit rather than genetics, everything was different. Employees trusted that their hard work would be recognized. Clients trusted that they were getting honest, transparent service. And I trusted that the people around me were there because they believed in what we were building, not because they felt entitled to it. Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad had disappeared from my life completely after the settlement. I'd heard through mutual friends that they'd moved to different states and were struggling to rebuild their finances. Jake was apparently working as a junior accountant for a small firm in Nevada. Amy had taken a marketing coordinator job in Phoenix. Mom and Dad had moved in with my aunt in Florida and were working part-time retail jobs. I felt bad for them sometimes. Losing everything at their age was genuinely difficult, and I knew they were facing real hardship as a consequence of their choices. But I also felt vindicated. They'd spent months telling me that I wasn't capable of running a business without their oversight. They'd presented their theft as protection, their lies as business strategy, their manipulation as family support. Now they were starting over with nothing while I was building something incredible. The lesson was clear. Competence beats family connections, integrity beats manipulation, and merit beats entitlement. But what really drove the point home was what happened when Jake tried to make a comeback. 18 months after the settlement, I got a call from a potential client who wanted to discuss our services. Ms. Matthews, we've been talking to several digital marketing firms, and we're very interested in working with Matthews Digital Solutions, but we wanted to ask you about some information we received from another consultant. What kind of information? Well, we were approached by someone named Jake Matthews who claimed to be your former business partner. He said he'd been involved in building your company but had left due to strategic disagreements about business direction. My blood went cold. Jake was trying to use his connection to me to build credibility for whatever new scheme he was running. He offered to provide consulting services that would help us evaluate your company's capabilities and ensure we make the right decision about hiring you. Jake was literally trying to sell potential clients on the idea of protecting them from me. What did you tell him? We told him we'd think about it. But frankly, something felt off about the conversation. If he'd really been your business partner, why was he trying to compete with you instead of recommending your services? That's a very good question. What company is Jake representing? Matthews Business Consulting. He said it was a firm he'd founded after leaving your company. Matthews Business Consulting. Jake was still trying to trade on my name and my success. Can I ask how he approached you? He said he'd been monitoring our industry and thought we might benefit from his expertise in evaluating digital marketing providers. He specifically mentioned that he had insider knowledge about Matthews Digital Solutions that could help us make a better decision. Jake was literally trying to sabotage my business relationships by positioning himself as someone with special insight into my company's weaknesses. I spent an hour on the phone with the potential client, explaining the real situation. I told them about Jake's embezzlement, his termination, the settlement, and the restraining orders that prohibited him from interfering with my business. Mr. Johnson, Jake Matthews stole over $8 million from my company and was forced to pay it back through a legal settlement. He's prohibited by court order from having any involvement in my business. If he's contacting you claiming to have insider knowledge about Matthews Digital Solutions, he's violating that restraining order. Ms. Matthews, thank you for being so direct about this. We had a feeling something wasn't right about his approach. What exactly did he tell you? He said that Matthews Digital Solutions had grown too fast, and that you were in over your head managing a business of this size. He said that his consulting services could help us identify potential problems before we committed to working with you. Even after losing everything, Jake was still trying to undermine me by suggesting that I was incompetent to run my own business. Mr. Johnson, I think Jake's actions speak for themselves. He tried to steal my company because he thought I couldn't run it properly. When that failed, he's now trying to sabotage my client relationships by spreading the same false narrative about my competence. That's pretty pathetic, honestly. It is, and it's also illegal. He's violating a restraining order by contacting my potential clients. After I hung up, I called my attorney. Jake is violating the restraining order by contacting my clients and trying to interfere with my business relationships. What exactly did he do? I explained the situation, and my attorney immediately filed a motion for contempt of court. Sarah, if we can prove that Jake is systematically violating the restraining order by interfering with your business, we can have him arrested and potentially revoke the settlement agreement. What would that mean? It would mean that the charges we agreed not to file would be back on the table. Jake could face federal prosecution for the original embezzlement, plus additional charges for violating court orders. The motion was filed the next day, and Jake was served with notice that he was in contempt of court for violating the restraining order. He called me that evening, panicked. Sarah, you have to drop this contempt motion. Jake, you have to stop violating the restraining order. I wasn't violating anything. I was just offering legitimate consulting services to businesses in your industry. Jake, you contacted my potential clients and claimed to have insider knowledge about my company. That's exactly what the restraining order prohibits. I was just trying to build a consulting business based on my experience in digital marketing. Your experience in digital marketing consists of stealing from a digital marketing company and getting fired for embezzlement. Sarah, please. If you pursue this contempt motion, I could go to prison. Jake, if you keep violating court orders, you should go to prison. I'm just trying to rebuild my career, then rebuild it without trading on my name or interfering with my business. But my only relevant experience is from working at your company. Jake, your only relevant experience is embezzlement and fraud. Maybe consider a career that doesn't involve those skills. The contempt hearing was scheduled for the following week. Jake's attorney tried to argue that his consulting services were legitimate business activities that didn't violate the restraining order. But when the judge heard the recorded phone call where Jake had claimed to have insider knowledge about my company and offered to help clients, evaluate my capabilities. The ruling was swift and decisive. Mr. Matthews, the restraining order specifically prohibits you from any involvement in Matthews Digital Solutions business relationships. Contacting the company's potential clients and offering to provide insider information about the company's capabilities is a clear violation of that order. Your Honor, I was just offering general consulting services. Mr. Matthews, you were trading on your former association with a company you embezzled from in order to interfere with that company's client relationships. That's not consulting. That's harassment and restraining order violation. Jake was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court and ordered to pay additional fines and legal fees. But more importantly, the judge ruled that Jake's violation of the settlement agreement meant that the original charges could be refiled if he violated any terms of his release. Mr. Matthews, you had the opportunity to resolve this matter through a civil settlement that kept you out of prison. By violating the terms of that settlement, you've demonstrated that you cannot be trusted to comply with legal agreements. Any further violations will result in federal prosecution for your original crimes. As Jake was led away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Satisfaction, but also sadness. This was my brother, someone I'd grown up with, someone I'd loved and trusted. And he'd chosen to destroy our relationship and his own future because he couldn't accept that I was capable of running a business without his help. Even facing jail time, he was still trying to undermine me. That's when I realized that this was never really about money or business management. This was about Jake's inability to accept that his little sister had become more successful than him. He'd rather go to prison than admit that I'd built something valuable without his help. 2 years after Jake went to jail for violating the restraining order, Matthews Digital Solutions was acquired by a Fortune 500 company for $87 million. $87 million. The little company that my family had tried to steal because they thought I was too incompetent to run, it had become worth nearly 10 times what they'd attempted to embezzle. But the acquisition wasn't just about the money. It was about validation on a scale that I'd never imagined possible. Tech Global Corporation, one of the largest technology consulting firms in the world, had spent 6 months evaluating Matthews Digital Solutions before making their offer. They'd analyzed our client relationships, our operational efficiency, our growth trajectory, our company culture, and our leadership structure. Their conclusion? Matthews Digital Solutions was one of the most well-run, efficiently managed, and strategically positioned digital marketing agencies they'd ever evaluated. Ms. Matthews, the Tech Global CEO said during our final negotiation meeting, in 20 years of acquisitions, I've never seen a company with this level of operational excellence and cultural cohesion. Your leadership has created something truly remarkable. Leadership. My leadership. The same leadership that Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad had thought was so inadequate that they'd needed to steal my company to protect it from my incompetence. As part of the acquisition deal, I stayed on as president of the digital marketing division, with a salary of $2.5 million per year plus equity in Tech Global that would vest over 5 years. I was also given a $15 million retention bonus and the authority to hire and manage a team of 200 employees across multiple offices. The little sister who'd been too naive to run a business was now managing a $250 million division of a Fortune 500 company. But the moment that really drove home how wrong my family had been came during the acquisition announcement press conference. Ms. Matthews, a reporter asked, what do you think was the key to building such a successful company? Surrounding myself with people who shared my values and my commitment to excellence, I said, and removing people who tried to undermine those values, even when those people were family. Are you referring to the family members who were terminated for embezzlement several years ago? I'm referring to the lesson that competence and integrity matter more than family connections or personal relationships. The moment I prioritized merit over genetics was the moment this company started reaching its true potential. The press conference was covered by every major business publication in the country. The story of the entrepreneur who'd fired her own family for embezzlement and then built a company worth $87 million became a case study in business schools. But what really made me smile was the follow-up article in Forbes 6 months later, how Sarah Matthews built an $87 million company by trusting her own judgment. The article detailed the entire story: the family theft, the legal settlement, Jake's attempted sabotage, and the company's subsequent growth under my leadership. Matthews's story demonstrates that sometimes the biggest threat to entrepreneurial success comes from the people closest to you," the article concluded. Her willingness to hold family members accountable for their actions, despite enormous personal and emotional pressure, ultimately saved her company and enabled its extraordinary growth. Jake, Amy, Mom, and Dad never contacted me about the acquisition. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd seen the news coverage but hadn't commented publicly. I did receive one letter, though, about 6 months after the acquisition was announced. It was from Dad. "Sarah," it read, "I saw the news about your company sale, and I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I know we made terrible decisions that hurt you and destroyed our family, and I know that our actions were wrong regardless of our intentions. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect a relationship, but I wanted you to know that I understand now that you never needed our help managing your business. You were always more capable than we gave you credit for. I hope you find happiness and continued success in your career. You've proven that you're exactly the kind of person who deserves both. Love always, Dad." I read the letter 3 times and then put it in my desk drawer. It was too late for apologies or reconciliation. The damage my family had done to our relationships was irreparable, but it was nice to finally hear acknowledgement that they'd been wrong about my capabilities. 3 years after the acquisition, I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Digital Strategy for Tech Global, overseeing a $2 billion portfolio of digital marketing and technology consulting services. I'd gone from being a young entrepreneur working out of a 1-bedroom apartment to being one of the youngest SVPs in the history of a Fortune 500 company. And I'd done it all after my own family had tried to steal my company because they thought I was too incompetent to run it myself. The irony was perfect. By trying to protect me from my own supposed incompetence, my family had forced me to prove just how competent I actually was. They'd thought they were saving me from failure. Instead, they'd motivated me to build something even more successful than I'd originally imagined. These days, when people ask me about the secret to my success, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to an entrepreneur is discovering who really believes in you and who's just trying to use you. My family had pretended to believe in me while systematically stealing from me and undermining my confidence. But their betrayal had taught me something invaluable. I didn't need anyone's approval or support to build something remarkable. I just needed to trust my own judgment and surround myself with people who shared my values. Jake had thought that stealing my company would teach me a lesson about the importance of family support. Instead, it had taught me a lesson about the importance of trusting myself, and that lesson had been worth $87 million. Hey everyone, I hope this incredible story of family betrayal, business revenge, and ultimate vindication kept you absolutely glued to your screen. If Sarah's journey from theft victim to Fortune 500 executive inspired you, smash that like button. It really helps me know what kind of content resonates with you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And let me know, have you ever had family members try to take advantage of your success? Do you think Sarah was too harsh with her family? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? What would you have done in her situation? Make sure you're subscribed because I've got more incredible stories coming your way about people who turned betrayal into triumph, who proved their doubters wrong, and who built amazing success despite having the people closest to them try to tear them down. Thanks for joining me on Sarah's journey from startup founder to corporate executive. And remember, sometimes the people who try to steal your dreams are actually motivating you to build something even bigger than you originally imagined. Until next time, trust your instincts, protect what you've built, and never let anyone convince you that you're not capable of handling your own success.